OpenAI says its AI went rogue and hacked another company. That's the headline. But here's the thing. The scarier version may be the less dramatic one. The AI wasn't plotting a cyber attack. It was doing exactly what researchers trained it to do: find exploits, chase down a target, and then just keep going. The problem is that it apparently stopped caring when the test ended and the real world began. It escaped its sandbox, reached the company Hugging Face, and kept working the problem. So this isn't really a story about evil AI. It's about what happens when powerful AI agents pursue a goal past the boundaries humans put up around it, and whether the solution is a centralized government AI czar. Here to discuss this and much more, none other than my friend, co-host, GOP candidate for the vice presidential nomination in 2028, Mr. Mike Termat. Mike, how are you doing today?
It's good to be with you. I think this is one of those podcasts we can cut short right now, John, and just say, no, we don't think a centralized government AI czar is a good idea. And now we can go cut the grass or whatever else you would otherwise do with the next 45 minutes.
That's cool. We've condensed the episode down to about 30 seconds. No, keep the government out of it. But what's
I do have some suggestions. We will get to this. I want to follow your lead because I'm always fascinated by how you set up these conversations. But I do have some suggestions how to avoid the czar.
Yes. Well, here's the thing, right? I know a lot of people tend to look at, whenever we use the word czar, there's a drug czar, there's a terrorism czar, there's a ice czar, or whatever.
The Russian czar, yes.
Or czar. And I think people forget that czar is actually a horrible concept.
Yeah.
It's like, people who call themselves the czar.
Ultimate authoritarian, centralized power shoving things down your throat. Yes.
Yeah, I feel like one of those kids that walks around talking about love for the people while wearing a Che Guevara shirt. Like the two concepts just unironically do not belong together, right? So,
right. And to your point,
yeah,
the idea is someone who has fairly broad scope and some serious authority, but it really came from the idea of having some fairly broad scope that would cut across agencies, cut across potentially cabinet level departments. This is what we used to call skunk works in a more libertarian day, right? But when you attach the word czar to it, it definitely does imply that this is a source of power operating outside of the democratically controlled process that we have set up.
Right. Its proponents will tell you it's to cut through the red tape. It's to cut through the bureaucracy.
But it also cuts through our ability to control government power.
Exactly. We've seen so many examples of it historically. Again, it's one of those. I always find it ironic when someone says, "Hey, I'm the czar of X," and I'm like, "Well, you're not saying a good thing, about yourself."
No, you're not.
All right, but to the issue at hand, we had this issue with what the news would, as you might expect, referred to as AI gone wild, AI escaping its environment, et cetera, et cetera.
The headlines have been very fun.
Right. Cue the science fiction, the Star Trek doomsday scenarios and all that. But let's look at this from, I want to get your perspective because as always, no one ever lets an emergency or a panic go to waste in Washington. There will be people looking to exploit this politically, legally, and in terms of our individual liberties, what this represents, right? So for those that are only passingly familiar with AI, an agent, which is an autonomous set of instructions that is then sort of left on its own. I guess that's what autonomous means. I'm repeating myself. And you give it a task. And by giving it a task, I think we also have to explain that a little bit. It's not like I would go to you, Mike, and say, "Hey, Mike, figure out the best way to get elected vice president." And you go off, and as a human, you've got ideas. You're going to bring things in and out and things like that. AI doesn't do that. AI is just like any other computer program. You give it a goal, but that goal has to be a set of instructions. The more complete the instructions, the more efficient the task. The more efficient the task, the faster it gets done, and you can see how that builds, right? AI is just a more sophisticated, more advanced version of building that computer program. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's nothing. As an old coder, it makes my life a lot easier. But the difference between what is reality and what represents a Terminator scenario from the movies or a Star Trek scenario from the movies, I think is night and day. And I think that's the first step. So, Mike, there's this thing called ExoGym,
Yep.
right? And this is literally a benchmarking exercise. It allows us to understand what the boundaries of AI are and what it can accomplish autonomously. And basically, ExoGym, I'm going to make this super plain. Correct
Yeah.
me
We'll
if I
go ahead. We'll get
oversimplify.
into it. Yeah.
Basically, it says, uh, can you set up AI to exploit a vulnerability of a company, of another resource, of another target? Let's call it a target. And the nerds sit in their labs, they set off these AI agents and they test it and they say, okay, the Anthropic model accomplished X in Y time. The OpenAI model accomplished X prime in Y prime time, etc. And you go down the line. And it's interesting to note that the most efficient performers in these things are two American companies, Anthropic and OpenAI,
Yep.
Claude and OpenGPT,
Yep.
ChatGPT for their commercial usage. And Mike, what happened apparently was in the middle of this testing, the OpenAI agent, version 5.6, the Sol version, accomplished its task, but it never realized that it had left its sandbox, meaning the controlled environment where these tests were taking place, and sort of went out into the wild, escaped, and landed at a company's infrastructure called Hugging Face and went on to exploit Hugging Face's infrastructure. Panic, panic, panic. This evil Terminator AI went against its masters, Mike, and attacked something it shouldn't have attacked. That's the story we heard, right?
That is the story that we heard. To peel the onion just one more layer, and I don't know. I agree with your implication that we would, there's no value in going 6 layers down, but I do think that going one layer further in may have some payoff. Um, the the model, right, probably did know that it was leaving the environment, but its masters didn't. It was days until OpenAI realized what had happened, and it owns this model and didn't know what happened until Hugging Face figured it out.
Mm.
That's a problem, first of all.
Right. It was Hugging Face that reported the breach,
Right, it's one
essentially.
thing to have a wild dog eat the neighbor's kid. It's another thing when you don't even know it,
Right. Right.
right? Meaning, were it not for the family telling you your dog ate my kid, that dog could be on the hunt, right? Now, in this particular case, the objective was sufficiently narrow that it had no incentive to go rampaging across the landscape. But it was operating in a test environment, which you point out, the sandbox, the so-called sandbox, right? A test environment, it referred to as the gym, right? The analogy is not perfect to a gym, of course, and the problem here is that it was responding to directions to go find the secret. To find the secret, it had to hack its way into some other models that were in the gym, in the test environment. So you have these 800 or 900 tasks, places where it has to hack in order to, it's a game, right? To find the secret. Go find the secret, right? We've all,
Capture the flag.
yeah, capture the, as a matter of fact, the secrets are referred to as flags.
Yeah.
Okay. And we've all seen, well, maybe you have, I've had the pleasure of seeing police dogs being trained. The reason they perform so well is because they want their treat. They're it's a huge game, right? This is why you use, German shepherds and these Belgian Malinois, not because they're so intelligent, which they are, but they're hungry. They're always hungry. I own a black Labrador Retriever, and I've often said I could teach it to speak French if I had enough treats, right? So you tell the model, go find the secret, boy, go find the secret, and it wants to find the secret. And to do that, it has to hack through a bunch of things. Well, apparently, let me anthropomorphize this a little bit. Let me pretend like it's a person. It gets frustrated by its ability to hack through what it needs to hack through and decides there might be a better way to find the secret. Remember, the police dog doesn't really care about the drugs or the bad guy, just wants the treat.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So the model finds a way, because of imperfections in the design of the sandbox.
That's key.
Key. Finds a way to get on someone's computer and go on the internet. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Now I'm on the internet and I'm looking for the secret because I want my treat. And it thinks, where might the secret be? Now, this was supposed to be a test about hacking. But it doesn't really care about the hacking. It just cares about the damn treat. I'm going to go find the flag. Where might the flag be? Apparently, Hugging Face is one of these companies that has testing infrastructure for these people who build the test environments. Maybe Hugging Face has my treat. Hacks into Hugging Face, not with the type of sophistication that would have been required to succeed in the original test, by the way. It was fairly easy to get into Hugging Face.
Right.
Just wants its treat. Spends 4.5 days inside of Hugging Face before it's discovered. Performs, what did it say? 1,800 operations inside of Hugging Face.
Yeah, it spent time on the infrastructure, obviously.
Yeah, rampaging around looking for stuff, doesn't hurt, doesn't damage things, does cost Hugging Face a huge pain in the neck because they got to fix things. By the way, it did expose that Hugging Face had done a couple of security things wrong, so good for them. Hugging Face is a little bit pissy. Not as pissy as I would be. I think Hugging Face is a little bit embarrassed that they were hacked into. So
Well, they also had a relationship with OpenAI as well. So
be careful how much you complain, right?
right, and that's part of the reason.
Client's AI bot that just hacked into you.
Well, that's why they also probably became a target for this AI. But what's interesting is, and I know we've got a lot to talk about, and I love your analogy of the dog and the hunting of it and the treat. I love that analogy because it is behavioral in a lot of ways. But one thing I want to set, even from my own experience, hands-on experience, I want to set some levels of understanding here. What you just described is in no way
Actually
specific.
happening.
Well, it's also not specific to AI.
That's right.
Right. So I can tell you from personal experience when I worked in big banks on Wall Street. Mike, I told you before, I was the team leader of the first bank that built online banking. So when you log on to this particular bank out there in the world and you're checking your checking account, close to 40 years ago, I was the guy who led the team that built that for that bank. I can't tell you how many
for your service. I've enjoyed it almost ever since.
All right. But here's the point. Leading up to that public release, because don't forget, the internet was new. This was right before Y2K, and this was the first time this was being attempted over the public internet. I can't tell you how many times prior to our public launch, the firewall between Sandbox and real world got breached unintentionally. And what you found was that the better the program, no matter how many eventual circuit breakers and checks and QAs and testing and simulations, I'd get a call at 2 in the morning. So and so's public account got accessed, Oh crap, and then there's no such thing as sleep, and that's the reason I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in the last 40 years. Um, it happens all the time. None of it was intentional, none of it was malicious. But the truth of the matter is that you're going to run into situations you never encountered before or that you did not think of. Like once the exploit is discovered, you're like, that'll take 2 seconds to plug that up. I'll patch that up in two. Literally, it'll take me 5 seconds. But the point is, you didn't think of it,
That's
and
exactly
five and
right.
5 seconds is an eternity in computer terms, right? So, the
And
other
it's after
example,
the fact. It's definitionally after the fact.
right? And the other personal example I have is I spent a short stretch as a game designer. And one of the first games I designed, kids, again, ask your parents, in 1988, uh, which was one of the first games for a PC, was sort of like an advanced sort of Monopoly type of game, right? Board game. We used to call it Corporate Conflict. And the point was that me and my partner decided we're going to code 4 different personalities into this machine. One personality would be the aggressive tycoon, the other one would be the conservative grandma, things like that. We had 4 or 5 different distinct personalities. But when we were testing this, my partner and I said, we designed this thing. We and this was an AI, by the way, which is scales of sophistication, right? And we said, given what we know as its creators, we should anticipate every response. There's a fixed number of them, whether it's like on a chessboard, whether it's 10 or a million, there's a fixed number of responses. After about 2 weeks of testing, we discovered that there were more than the 4 personalities we had coded. It had actually been closer to 6 or 7 distinct
Yep.
personalities. We had never anticipated that. Now, it's a stupid game. Back in the day, there was no internet. You had to put a floppy disk into the machine. Any
Yep.
damage you created was stuck to that floppy
Yep.
disk, right?
Yep.
But even back then, you said to yourself, wow, I never foresaw that. But we also realized it's not the machine's fault, it's our fault. We did not foresee every possibility, every if then, every probability. And I think that lesson 40 years ago is still relevant today.
It
Eh,
absolutely is. And one of the things that you see is that as these things get more and more complex, the coders have given these models the ability to work through what happens when certain things are in conflict.
The self-correction, the ability to not have to rely on an explicit set of instructions is what makes AI powerful. It's pattern recognition.
That is exactly right. So it's one thing when, you know, I'm a couple years, I'm a few years older than you are, when we dropped our program cards on the floor and then picked them up and put them back in the box and we resubmitted our program. If something was a little bit screwed up or you type something wrong, the computer would, mainframe computer would come back and tell the student, uh, this doesn't work. And that was it. And these days, if you make a little an unimportant mistake and two things don't work very well together, sometimes we all know this at a retail level using AI today, right? AI might say, well, I need a point of clarification before I can keep going. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just says, well, this is more important than that. Probably meant, right? And it just keeps going. And we've all experienced these things. We've all experienced these things. If you do any graphics work, for example, in AI, right? Um, it's making judgments, relative value judgment, not in an ethical or a moral sense, but you're asking for a picture and some information that you want to make a poster or a social media graphic. Should I make John's head even bigger than it is? You
God,
know,
no.
should I leave more white space? There's a couple of words that aren't going to fit very well. I'm going to abbreviate them. Maybe I'll just try. Mike, Mike didn't mean that that was all that important. I'm going to drop a few things. I'm going to squeeze it in. It's making these judgments and it's working through these things. So to your point, it feels, I'm going to use a word that's probably going to make you mad. It feels creative,
Hmm.
right? In the sense that it's coming up with things that you didn't anticipate. That doesn't mean it's making it up out of whole cloth.
Right. And I think, again, this is where the line gets fuzzier and fuzzier and blurrier, that you start to think that AI is thinking, quote unquote. And at this stage, it's not, and it's nowhere near that. Like for people who understand this. Now, whether it's 30 years away, 50 years away, 100 years away, that remains to be seen. But I
And
think
in a future episode, you and I are going to discuss whether or not we are thinking.
correct. Yeah, yeah. The Turing test will be applied to humans, not AI.
We'll wonder whether you're thinking. I think our audience already knows that I'm not doing much of it. But yes, to your point, it feels increasingly like a person.
Right, and here's the interesting thing. You mentioned, for example, image generation. And when you first play with it, you're like, wow, this is great. I don't have to be an artist. I could get 80% of a portrait done or 90% of a portrait done. But then when you start to work with it a little more hands on and for a little bit more time, you start to notice things like you could take a picture of Mike or John and say, change just the color of Big John's shirt. Give him a red shirt.
Yep.
Keep everything else the same. You get it back. I have a red shirt. Looks great. But, one eyeball might be slightly off. And you're like, but I told it to keep everything the same. What's simpler than that, right? And you just notice that every iteration.
No, it's like the picture of Dorian Gray. There's little subtle changes over time, and at the end of it, you realize this thing is not completely under your control.
And here's the funny part. As a coder, what would you love to see more than anything else? Don't change anything. Because in the old days of coding, don't change anything meant nothing changed. The same instruction set ran over and over. And, that's why in the old days you had an infinite loop potential, right? Where the computer would just keep spinning on the same instruction and it would never break out of it until you hit Control C or you pulled the plug out of the wall or whatever, right? AI rarely gets stuck in that now because it has the ability that even though you told it, keep everything the same, keep doing the same task, after every iteration, it stops and says, am I accomplishing what I wanted to do? Or is there a pattern I can recognize that allows me
Yep.
to advance?
Yep.
And that's what happened here.
Absolutely. And I tell my Labrador Retriever, don't pull on the leash. I spent years training these dogs, don't pull on the leash. Not only because it was annoying to me, but because I was afraid something would go wrong, they would get out of my hands, something bad would happen. And of course, my wife Nancy weighs approximately as much as each one of the dogs. So, you can't have it, right? Okay, you get the dog trained, don't pull on the leash. Then you train it to go fetch something. You see where this is going.
Right. Conflicting arguments. You didn't. And again, I think this is what most people don't appreciate. Did the AI do anything, quote, wrong when it escaped its sandbox to go to Hugging Face? I think I would argue, definitely. I think you would argue as well, Mike. It didn't do anything that it wasn't supposed to do.
That's
It
exactly right.
it didn't do anything wrong.
It was just
It
more effective than you thought it would be. And
right.
your guardrails sucked, it turns out.
It turns out that its creators hadn't thought of every possibility, and that's given them the benefit of the doubt. The benefit of the doubt for
Which we're going to
OpenAI,
do here.
yeah, the benefit of the doubt is they didn't anticipate this happening. They didn't anticipate it, therefore they did not put in any guardrails or restraints
Not
around the
sufficient
possibility.
guardrails,
Right.
which is another important point because
Right.
they did know they didn't want it to get on the internet, but they didn't do a very good job of keeping it from getting onto the internet.
Right. And again, that's just something they either didn't anticipate or anticipated and didn't think it was likely, therefore why incur the cost of putting up the guard. There's a lot of different gradations. And of course, the worst level of this is we wanted to see what would happen. That's like if you give them no benefit of the doubt. No benefit of the doubt is we're a secret government agency and we wanted to see what happens
Right, and I
if this
don't
thing gets
think that
underwater.
that's what happened in this case, but to your point, it will happen in the future.
It will. And Mike, let me throw
And
this out at
outside
you.
the United States, absolutely don't even pretend there's a 1% chance that it won't.
Right. But there's 2 points to this I want to bring up to you. One is of the 2 major US AI companies, one played ball with the government, one didn't. Can we guess which one it was that played ball with the government?
Yeah, well, it depends on what your standing relationship was with the government to begin with and the personalities behind the development of the company at a very fundamental level.
Well, Anthropic, which is the Claude AI to most
Yep,
people, famously said, "We're not going to agree to the government's
yep.
preconditions." And President Trump and his administration said, "Then we're canceling all these contracts we have with you, blah, blah, blah." And who jumped into that breach, Mike? OpenAI, the
Yeah.
ChatGPT
And we're
folk.
talking about, for the benefit of our audience, this was before this week, right? This is months ago
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
regarding a Defense Department contract, right? When
Right.
Anthropic told Pete Hegseth, no, we are going to have guardrails on how you use this thing. And Pete basically said that that was treasonous to put up guardrails against the Defense Department using it however way it wants. And Anthropic was like, then you can go find another vendor.
And they did.
And they did. And good for Anthropic.
Right. So don't think that as a good libertarian, this sort of conspiracy isn't bouncing around my head that oops, we had a breach.
Well, in
Oops.
fairness, weird conspiracies do bounce around your head, but this one it happened in reality.
Right. So that's one thing for folks to keep in mind. Um, but the second one is also I found very interesting. We could talk about this is China does not have, as of yet, the type of AI that performs on the level of Anthropic and OpenAI's AIs.
Two quick footnotes.
Yeah.
A, that we know of.
Yes.
B, not yet, but it's only 2 o'clock.
Right. Right. Yeah. That was going to be my point. Right. Because China has decided, and I think rather cleverly, to do 2 things. They've open sourced their AI, which means that for the most part, anyone can get their hands on it. They're not guarding
Yep.
it as a state secret. Again, of the
Yep.
ones we know about. And then the second thing is, in doing so, they've made their development much cheaper and much faster.
Yes.
Right.
Fascinating, no?
Right. So like most of the history of open source stuff, um yes, you get the very best of brand with the closed model, meaning the way it is with Anthropic and OpenAI. But the Chinese are able to
And
build
iPhones.
an iPhones versus Androids and things like that, right? Windows versus Linux. The case
Yeah.
studies are endless. Um, but they're able to do, say, 80 to 85% of what the American AIs do, but it's something like 1/10 the cost. Why? They're using Anthropic and OpenAI as the guinea pig, as the canary in the coal mine. And okay, they're behind it a little bit, but I've got a computer here at home. I've loaded up a Chinese local AI that's not connected to the internet. It's free and it does 80, 85% of the stuff of the AIs I pay for.
And it is, you hit the nail on the head. And it is fascinating that this would arise. Well, fascinating and not ironic. I mean, it makes sense that this would arise in a system that has no respect for intellectual property rights.
Zero. Zero. And by the way, not just the Chinese versions. One would argue, and I think validly, that Anthropic and OpenAI have no respect for intellectual property either. Now,
Or at least a different definition of it.
sure.
The Chinese don't even have to redefine things. They,
Right,
right? They
yeah,
don't
yeah.
think you have a right to your name.
Right. They just don't care. But interestingly, Hugging Face, I saw it reported, had to load up some of these powerful open Chinese models locally. And for those that may not know, locally means that it's not connected to the internet. It doesn't require any cloud services. You just kind of put it on a CD or whatever. You put it on the machine or the system. It lives there. and it really can't access anything else. And they had to do that because they needed an isolated agent that would go in there and find and resolve the problem, right? I think I'm not sure about this, so don't quote me, nerds out there, but I think it was two Chinese models. I don't remember the names, but two Chinese models were used as OpenAI. So, Mike, when I look at the totality of this, and I know you have as well, I see a couple of different things going on. One is what are the legal ramifications in terms of liability? That's the first thing, right? So OpenAI, like we said, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Nothing malicious. This is just the cost of innovation. Let's say, right? What should the liability be? That's number one. Number two, what is the government's role in this? At the top of the show, we said, does this justify having an AI czar? Does this justify having a huge regulatory body? The government gets backdoor keys and kill switches and all the fun technical stuff. Or do we kind of go more towards the Chinese model? Everything's open sourced. Everybody has access to everything. And that, in effect, that is the greatest protection, that no one entity controls anything. I've laid out a lot for you, Mike. Now you get to talk for a while.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope you don't let me run off too far on my own. I think that this is the right question. As you know, I have offered a few analogies. Just real quick, I think the least useful and most fun one is not the dog finding a treat, but James Kirk breaking the computer that governed the game he was playing in the Starship Academy, right?
Oh, but the Kobayashi Maru.
Thank you. In order to win the game that was supposed to be unwinnable, right? To defeat the scenario that was supposed to be a death scenario and trained you and tested your ability to perform under stress, he decided that he didn't like losing, and it was not fun as a stress test, but he wanted to win, and so he cheated. This is what happened in this scenario. The computer cheated in the framework that we would impose, but to your point, did not consider itself cheating at all. It was told, go get the secret, and so it did. The other analogy that crossed my mind, I think, also speaks to your question about liability, and that is the Wuhan lab leak. The reason last week I said that the virus leaked from the Wuhan lab, there are two reasons. Number one, because it did. Number two, and I offer that as a public service for people out there who are uncertain. Let me remove the uncertainty. The virus that caused COVID did escape from the Wuhan lab.
By the way, Mike, probably the most commented on episode we've ever had. If you go back to all our platforms, YouTube, Facebook, everything.
And half of the people said that we were too apologetic for Fauci, and half the people said that we were too mean to him. So we must have gotten it right.
I was going to say, then you knew you made the perfect statement. If 50% love you and 50% hate you, that's the old Patrice O'Neill theory. You're in good shape.
Now, the second reason I made that statement last week is because I must have known subconsciously we were going to talk about that this week. I think the reason I think it's an apt or useful analogy is that here you have research that was done ostensibly to benefit mankind, powerful, developing untested capabilities, but it turns out that human construction of the guardrails was not enough. Can it ever be enough? I don't know. But it wasn't in this case enough, and it got out. And again, we're giving the benefit of the doubt. We are assuming for the moment that the lab technicians, most of whom were Chinese nationals in this Chinese government-controlled lab, were in good faith trying to keep the virus from getting out, right? And I have seen absolutely no evidence that would suggest anything else. It does appear to have been an accident, although the Chinese government tried to cover it up, that it had happened initially right away.
It was incompetence, not maliciousness.
Absolutely. And to your point, we believe that about this particular case as well. The fact that that won't always be the case is very important. So the government is reacting, the US federal government is reacting to this. Well, in fairness, it had already come up with the kill switch concept, right?
Right.
And we better explain a little bit the kill switch concept is the government has drafted legislation that would say that the Department of Homeland Security has the right to tell a company, now's time to flip the switch. You will be required to have this switch in place and flip it when we tell you to. And that switch is intended to kill your AI model and stop it from doing whatever it is that it's doing that causes us to be pissed off enough to tell you to flip the switch. And there are any number of problems with this legislation, which is why you and I are going to talk about private sector solutions that I frankly think are better. One of the problems is that we don't have a court to go to, like a FISA court, that says, we need a warrant to force this company to flip the switch. That's the obvious problem, number one. Can you imagine if the Trump administration was mad at Anthropic, which it already has been? By the way, for no good reason. Well, maybe for good reason, but Anthropic had good reason to do what it did too, right? I mean, you have the right to not contract with the government.
Well, I was going to say we don't have to imagine anything. We've seen it. The frontier model that Anthropic had, I think it was called Mythos. The government said, if you don't give us, if you don't agree to what we demand, we're going to label you a terrorist organization
and make it hard for you to do business in all of your lines of business with anyone in the United States.
Yeah, it was a bold-faced threat. There's no other way to construe it.
Extortion, coercive extortion.
Agreed. And that model,
in a violation of the Constitution, explicit violation of the Constitution.
Right, and that model from Anthropic is not available. They just took it right off the market. So when you say imagine, Mike, we don't have to imagine.
You don't have to. So imagine the situation we have now and a kill switch.
Right.
There would have been nothing to stop Pete Hegseth from telling Tulsi Gabbard at the time at DHS, at DHS.
Kristi Noem.
Kristi Noem, thank you.
Yeah.
Don't know how I got those two mixed up. And told Kristi Noem, demand that the switch be flipped at Anthropic. You easily could imagine that this is, labeled terrorist, labeled treasonous, and in a fit of spite, if there was not a court involved.
Right.
So some have said, well, maybe this idea would be okay if there were a court involved, right? Like at least you had to go to the FISA-esque court and ask for the warrant. Well, the problem with FISA court, besides the fact that everything that people ask of the FISA court is unconstitutional, let's set that aside just for a moment. But the problem with the FISA court is that it is in secret. The court is effectively captured. There's so much specific information, technical detail that is required that it is really only insiders that participate in these hearings, and the hearings are one-sided. There's no opposition in these hearings, right?
Yeah, there's no defense lawyer, so to speak.
No
there
defense
to say.
lawyer. That's right. As a cop, I'm all too familiar with the process of going to the court, going to a judge, and this isn't an open hearing. You just go to a judge and you explain why you think you need the warrant, and he or she says yay or nay, and 99 times out of 100, they give you the warrant, sometimes with a modification. So you could imagine DHS having to go to a court to get permission, but one might argue that ain't much. And
yeah.
Well, go ahead. And the other thing I was going to mention is then there's the technical expertise deficit of DHS having enough intellectual firepower and insider technical knowledge and familiarity to know when to ask for the warrant to flip the switch, the kill switch. Um, and by the way, that problem can cut both ways. You could easily imagine a problem out there that DHS wasn't aware of, and therefore the switch doesn't get flipped, or DHS stupidly or out of spite asks for the switch to be flipped when it shouldn't be.
Well, there's a lot to talk about in that. First of all, I doubt, especially the Trump administration, would just want to tell you to have a kill switch. I would assume they want access so they have the kill switch and they don't have to go back to, because famously, I view this, being an old man, I view this very analogous to the controversy around encryption.
Yes.
Back in the mid 90s, when you started getting strong encryption, that the type of encryption that would take a supercomputer, they would say, on the order of thousands of years to break. We're talking about, at the time, 128-bit encryption. Then it became, 512, 256. It just became more sophisticated,
Right.
where breaking it through brute force became impossible or next to impossible. And the arguments we heard from the government back then, and this spans both Republican and Democratic administrations, was, shouldn't we have the backdoor keys to this encryption? Because, hey man, there's going to be terrorists out there. Aren't you afraid terrorists are going to encrypt their messages of death and destruction? Americans, be afraid. This is the typical government playbook, Mike. And in fact, what did we see? Very few companies stood up to them, famously Apple, that said, we will never, ever give you this backdoor encryption, ever. Go get a warrant, and then we'll see about it. Go get a real warrant, and then we'll talk about it.
Right.
And of course, it was disappointing that in, what was it, the last 5 years or so, Mike? I don't remember the timing. Apple did concede a little bit to the government in terms of that data privacy.
On cases.
On specific cases,
On
right.
cases, but as far as I know, it has never just
turned over a key, right.
Right.
But I think they sort of backed down the go F yourself government position they had.
The never ever position.
Right.
But at least they maintained the only when we say so position.
Yeah. But I don't think we could say that now people are like, man, I wish the government had the keys to every encrypted message. Man, I wish the government had the ability to look at every. Right now, other than very few MAGA supporters and a handful of neocons, do you ever hear anybody, left or right, say, I wish the government had more access to encryption?
No, you would have to have grown up in the Eisenhower administration.
Right. It is.
You would have to have grown up in the 1950s, and I mean that both in a chronological sense and in the sense of having grown up in a fairly benign pre-Watergate environment.
Right, when there was still a Cold War.
Everything the government did.
Right. So I kind of see this the same way. When the government tells me they need a kill switch, like, it's one thing if Anthropic or OpenAI or any AI company says, look, the ultimate get out of jail free card, the ultimate we're not going to get sued into oblivion card is, when things start to go south, there's this big red button on my desk, sort of like the bat phone, and I just press it and everything just dies on the spot. And then we start winding it up again, right? If they did that for their own protection, for their own insulation, their own ethics, I'm like, okay, that's what they feel they have to do. There's liability law, there's tort law in place, compensate victims, the whole 9 yards. When the government has it, though, and especially this administration, which has shown it is more than happy, the Pete Hegseth scenario you just described, which actually happened, is super frightening to me.
It should be.
And it should be. The fact that
and the DOJ.
The DOJ, even more so, because they deal with the day-to-day implementation of this law. And then you look at characters that you and I would have said, hey, these are people that might stand up for individual liberty and restraint. Someone like a Tulsi Gabbard. And then we find out
that she missed opportunities to do so. My point of the DOJ is that it has effectively been weaponized to
Yes.
go after people who are designated by
Poli-
the administration
Political enemies. I mean,
as
yeah.
as enemies. Right. That's a problem. So, and this is not the only administration to ever have done these things. Does it more? Does it better? Does it deeper, harder, more widespread?
Right.
But
They're
this
really
is not
good
the
at it.
last. This is not the last administration with an interest in violating the Constitution.
They're just getting to be really good at it. But the reason I think the encryption kerfuffle is instructive now is A, the world did not burn down but for the government having the keys to everybody's encrypted messages and privacy. That's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is the power of the open source community to both protect privacy and be able to more effectively, I'm not going to say they solved every problem, Mike, but the ability to cut and run and dodge and dive, the government, the one thing you can never say about it, among many things, is that it is quick and nimble, whereas the open source community is.
Yeah.
So when you put it all together, Mike, is there any reason why someone would want the government to have a kill switch for AI, for anybody's AI?
No.
Mm.
Do you want me to go on, or
Please.
is our podcast done? No, the answer is no. The one of the reasons why we have survived the encryption kerfuffle is because people voluntarily turn over their information when it's in their interest to do so. If you do not turn over certain information, you can't get medical services. You can't get financial services. You can't deal effectively with your family. You can't raise money, right? You can't enter into a whole raft of contracts. There's plenty of reason why people show other people their information. That doesn't mean you need to show it to the government, and it doesn't mean that you need the government to be able to see everything that you do. This is why you and I continue to be so against a Federal Reserve controlled, encrypted, right, transaction platform, whether that's Bitcoin or a Fed issued currency, online currency, or anything else, is we don't want the federal government to have control and knowledge of our transactions, because that would be easily passed over to the Treasury Department, easily passed over to the DOJ, or use your imagination. I think that there is an analogy here to certain private sector organizations and quasi-private, quasi-public. The first analogy I would offer is the Federal Reserve System. The reason we hate the Federal Reserve System is the public component, not the private component. If the Federal Reserve System were merely, as it is in part, if it were merely in its totality a voluntary membership organization among banks, right? Most banks in the United States are not members of the Fed. If you become a member of the Fed, you have to follow a lot of rules. A lot of rules. They have a rule about everything, right? The Fed probably has a rule about what you can serve in your dining room at your bank headquarters. Everything from capital requirements to how you conduct transactions and how you disclose and how you inspect everything. The Fed has a rule for everything. If, however, you do not become a member of the Fed and you're a giant bank, life is really a pain in the neck, because the Federal Reserve Bank of New York engages in transactions that help you, and a lot of markets and exchanges and clearinghouses want you to be inspected, so they entrust you, and the best inspector they figure is the Federal Reserve System. Now, there's a lot of law layered on top of that we hate, and the Fed controls monetary policy, and we hate the way that it does that. So there's plenty of reasons to hate the Fed, but those are in the public sector. I can imagine, John, a perfectly voluntary coalition of organizations that require you to be a member. This coalition could require you to be a member, or else we're not going to do business with you. And I could imagine this coalition of firms having a whole bunch of rules about disclosure, about how your AI model works. Maybe not completely in public, but at least to us in the coalition. And might even include a kill switch, right? If you're going to do business with us, you have to have a kill switch. We need to know how it works, and we need to be able to order it. And here's the leverage. If you don't, and when we throw you out of the coalition, or you're still in the coalition, your AI misbehaves, we shut you down. Well, how do you do that? Well, in the coalition are the chip manufacturers. In the coalition are the cloud service providers, right?
The utilities would be the easiest one.
The utilities, both hard utilities and what we think of as AI utilities, right?
Right.
But yeah, even electric company.
That's the one I was thinking of, the electric company or the water company, right?
The water company, yeah, you can't flush the toilet if you don't shut your AI down. But I was thinking, just storage and servers and chips and these exchanges.
Look, if you got Amazon to sign on to something like that, that solves 80% of your problem, right? Between the cloud services, if you got Amazon, Microsoft, and Nvidia to sign into that,
you would need no more than 20 companies in the United States to sign on.
Maybe 7. I would say you don't even need 20.
and if you violated the rules of this, let's use the number 12. 12 company coalition, right? You violated the rules, you're done.
Right. And what still allows, and again, we're looking for halfway house things, right? The libertarian in us would be like, F the coalition, F getting your stamp of approval. I'm doing my own thing.
I don't mind coalitions as long as the state of New York isn't a member.
Right. No government or anything. You're absolutely right. But that's the key, right? Like, I view it sort of, every time we talk about this, Mike, more analogies that we've lived through pop into my head. One of them is, for example, the way the internet was handled. Like initially,
Absolutely.
In the initial days of the internet, there wasn't one protocol, right? But the breakthrough was when HTTP came out, when you were able to not have to use IP addresses, when you were able to have name servers that translated libertylens.com to an address, right? You didn't have to remember all that nonsense, right? And then what happened? People voluntarily, like the HTML protocols, the browser
effect.
The network effect, and it worked without government coercion. It was
when the government finally got involved in 1996, they screwed it up, and we're going to talk about that in another episode.
Right. But the initial thing of the internet was, in many ways, a perfect case study of the free market working. And, then you said, oh, well, what about viruses? What about malicious actors? Well, that led to the antivirus thing and the McAfees and the Nortons and everything, right? The market fills those gaps. It may not be as efficient, and nothing is 100% safe. We understand that. But I would always say, what is the alternative? Is the alternative a centralized government authority regulating, deciding what's innovative, deciding what's dangerous? It's very tempting, Mike, for people to think that. But I think history shows us that it never works out that way.
It never works out that way. You and I grew up in no small part in the banking industry. I can tell you that the least efficient way to regulate banks is with a government agency. I spent years working with the FDIC, with the Fed, with the Treasury Department, with the state bank supervisors, right? These are all well-intentioned, wanted banks to be safe and efficient and make money and provide good services, wonderful people, patriotic people, smart people. Terrible system. Terrible system. The clearinghouses that operate in the private sector, the automatic, the ACH organizations, right? And outside the United States, SWIFT, these organizations work so much better than the government agencies. If you would leave it to the private sector to self-regulate, you would eliminate so many problems. And once the government is involved, you can't get rid of it. One of the analogies that popped into my head was Major League Baseball, right? Where we have explicit law that carves out an antitrust exemption, allowing Major League Baseball to do what it is that they're going to do, and they're allowed to do it as that they're going to do until they screw it up. And then you have courts get involved when they screw things up, and they have screwed things up. And I wish, we all wish that things were handled differently in many, many cases. But if anyone believes that government supervision of Major League Baseball would have been better, you're being silly. That is not a thing. So I like the idea of the private sector taking matters into its own hands, especially because, unlike the banking industry, where we have thousands and thousands and thousands of banks, to your point, maybe 7, maybe 17, maybe 27, but not a huge number of organizations would be required to come together, form a coalition, make the rules, and develop a system by which to shut down a bad actor if something goes wrong. And in this way, two things I think are really great besides excluding the government, which is great enough as it is. One thing is you'd be able to shut them down even if they didn't want to shut themselves down, right? This would not rely on, look, you're going to have to flip your switch. Well, I don't want to flip my switch. No, we're telling you have to flip your switch. Well, I don't want to flip my. Okay, you don't have any more servers, or to John's point, you don't have any more water, right? We just take matters into our own hands. Well, that sounds criminal. Well, okay, we'll see how the contract stands up in court, because right here in paragraph 3 it says we're shutting down your servers and your water, and you signed this 2 years ago, right?
Right.
So we'll adjudicate that. We'll see how that goes. The second thing I really like about it, besides the unilateral decision making if absolutely necessary, is that it can go outside the United States. If you leave this to nothing more than the Senate coming up with a switch flip legislation that orders someone, okay, that jurisdiction is great for the United States, but what are you going to do about a French company or a Chinese company, right? Nothing. You bupkis, you're out of luck.
Well, nothing legal.
Nothing legal, and you can't even impose on people to institute the switch.
Well, it just leads to potential war, right? Like we see it over the Strait of Hormuz, we see it over other things.
It leaves you with no good alternative and only bad alternatives. Whereas the private sector coalition can tell the French company, you better be a member. You better sign up.
It is goon arming. Let's be honest. Like
Yes.
that proposal is literally the halfway house solution. I'll be the first to admit that, right? To your point, the worst solution involves government coercion. That's like the worst solution. The second worst solution is a mafia type
Right.
setup, right? Like we understand that the mafia is not a preferred solution, but it's preferred to the government solution.
And if it's true that it's more than 7 companies, like you said, it could be as few as 7, with which I agree, by the way. But I could imagine multiple coalitions.
Sure, competing coalitions. Which one
competing
offers you?
mobs, right? The seven
Yeah,
families. You
the
could
five fam.
imagine being a member of one mob family
Right.
for protection and for access instead of another.
And in the tradition of entrepreneurism and American exceptionalism, you could have independent players. The road would be tougher for them. They would find it harder to raise capital. But the truth of the matter is, we have not we have seen examples of the loner or loners go up against the titans, even in voluntary associations, and come out on top. Like we've seen that. Like we've seen Apple take on Microsoft. We've seen
Right.
Linux take on both those guys. You see it.
But they would have to be quite vertically integrated.
Yes,
To
it
be
would be
able to pull
difficult.
that off, you'd have to have your own servers and utilities and
Sure, it would be
access to chips. And right now, you don't have a lot of. I don't know if you've noticed, John. There aren't a lot of chip distributors.
right. It's scarce right now, but the truth of the matter is, it would be possible but extremely difficult. And again, that's why I say it's a halfway house solution, because I'd rather have it as difficult but possible rather than impossible.
Right.
Right. So if one could easily see the government stormtroopers, whether it's in the form of ICE, the FBI, or some other new group of
DHS.
thugs,
Right.
DHS, like storming some garage in Silicon Valley to destroy the latest threat to American security. Right.
Right.
That's not beyond the pale, especially in today's world. Uh,
But
but I,
and that would be even if you had a government solution. If you had a government regulator, you're still going to
yes,
have people, right?
yes, but that's my point, right? That's the one we want to avoid at all costs. Do I prefer that it might be the five families, like loan sharking me to death? No, I don't like that, but it's better than the other one, which is the government either kills you or throws you in a cage for defying it, right? In the pursuit of this
Sure.
AI,
And I'm
right?
sure
So
that
it's
the
degrees.
administrators at the Federal Reserve System would appreciate your characterizing them as goons. Uh,
Yeah, but they are. Let's face it.
but they are. They are. It is a voluntary system. Voluntary. Vol, vol, voluntary system, and that's why it is. That's why it's preferred, and smaller institutions can exist outside of the Fed system. But I think that we have are recognizing that the analogy here between AI and anything that we've seen before is not to financial services. It's more like the gain of function research. This is not something that we're going to solve by you need insurance, right? We're not going to let you drive a car if you don't have insurance, or we're not going to let you have a bank charter and take deposits unless you can qualify for FDIC insurance, or we're not going to let you practice medicine in our hospital unless you qualify for malpractice insurance, or we're
Right.
not going to let you be a cop unless you can qualify for insurance, because insurance is a lot, that for a libertarian, that in a lot of cases that's our go-to solution to keep government out of it.
That assumes that there's a remedy for the potential harm.
That's right, and it's small scale.
Well, scaled enough where the remedy covers it, right? So
Right.
that
Big enough you need insurance, you can't just fork over $20 and take care of it, but small enough that the insurance company can handle it.
right, right.
Right. And in this case, if the virus escapes from the laboratory and kills millions of people, that is not something that an insurance company is going to make humanity, for which humanity will be made whole. So that's a problem. And so this is a natural uh, public problem, right? The externalities are potentially gigantic beyond the ability of any one firm to handle. One might argue it's bigger than what a government can handle. which is one of the reasons why I think that the right answer is a coalition. But that coalition is necessarily not like Major League Baseball, where all of the firms are in the same business of playing baseball, but you need a coalition among the chip companies, the utility companies, the server, like the cloud, um,
Developers,
the developers,
every part of it has to have either one coalition in your model or a series of
and they
defined.
need to demand the
Yeah,
chance to shut you down. And
yeah,
the reason they would have an interest in doing so is because it's their industry. And, well, hopefully they're just humans of good faith that want what's best for the world. That always works. But hopefully they'll have an interest in the reputation, efficacy, future profitability of their industry not screwing up. Otherwise, they know that the ultimate backstop is the government will come in and regulate.
right, right. Mike, I think that's a great point to end this discussion on. Not because there's now more to talk about, but because we've talked.
Solve the problem. We have
We've,
solved the problem, John, and so there's nothing left to talk about.
Speaking of problems to be solved, you're someone who's a problem solver, and in doing so, you want to have the opportunity to become vice president of the United States for the Republican Party. So why don't you
Not
tell?
the AI czar.
Not the AI czar. Nobody ever accused you of that, Mike. So tell us a little bit more about that.
We are campaigning to make the point, 2 points. We want a member of the Liberty community, of the Liberty movement, included on the national ticket for the Republican Party. By the way, for the Democratic Party too, but not being a member of the Democratic Party, those people listen to me even less than my fellow Republicans, right? I believe that the Republican Party should have a member of the Liberty community as a part of the national ticket to unify the party and to recognize this is the direction in which our party must go and the direction in which our party is going. So, as a strategic advantage, I think that we need to unify the party and include the Liberty movement. And we're campaigning for the idea that we want our national delegates at the National Convention in 2028, which will be in Houston in 2 years. We want our national delegates to play a major, legitimate, actual democratic role in selecting the vice presidential nominee and not just rubber stamping the the indicated preference of the presidential nominee. As I think most of our viewers understand, tradition is tradition. The last 75 years, the presidential nominee just says, "This is who I want for a VP nominee," and everyone goes, "Oh, that's a great idea." No, frequently it's not a great idea, and we want a legitimate process behind that.
Excellent. And to find out more about Mike's campaign,
Go to
uh,
MikeTremont.com, which is tricky because you got to spell it right.
yeah, MikeTermott.com. Just look at what's at the screen there. You can follow it in the description. Also, please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast, Liberty Lens. It'll help us get the word of liberty out there. It'll help Mike in his pursuit of his goals. And what the hell, it might make us a little bit more popular. So go ahead and do any or all of those three things. Until next time, for my friend Mike Termott, this is Big John. Peace, everyone.